Welcome to Sustainable Futures with Daniela Bas on the first and the third Saturday every month at 10 a.m. Czech time. Join me for in-depth conversations, exclusive interviews and strategic insights with industry leaders, policymakers and innovators shaping our future. We'll explore how integrating social fairness enhances business and impacts sectors like fashion, food, tech, tourism, sports, and more towards sustainable social change. Every organization gets stronger by challenging itself, so do we. I know it from my own life experience as a woman with a disability who understands the power of resilience, communication, and of thinking out of the box, and as a female executive leader at global level on social sustainability and inclusion. Be inspired, learn, and gain insights. Tune in, think different, and act with purpose. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, in whichever part of the world you are. Today we're going to talk about the future. And what a great future, I do hope so. We will focus on the Summit of the Future, which is scheduled to take place at the United Nations on the 22nd and the 23rd September this year, this month, in New York, at the United Nations headquarters. And this summit is being convened to advance multilateral efforts and address global challenges with a focus on strengthening the international system for peace, security, human rights, and sustainable development. So here we have today Daniel Perell, who serves the international community in his role at the Baha's International Community's UN office in New York. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniela. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I know that you have spent over a decade championing global citizenship, human rights, and sustainable development. And you have a dual background in law and diplomacy. And your work spans from Geneva to Indonesia. And allow me to say your influence at the United Nations is really reshaping how we think about justice and inclusion on a global scale. I had the opportunity to listen to your speeches years ago, and you're just marvelous. So
you're too generous, but thank you.
So we are really curious to know about what drives you and your mission. And I hope this episode uncovers the man behind the advocacy. Daniel, how do you envision the outcomes of the Summit of the Future, which is shaping the global approach, as I said, to peace, security, and sustainable development?
That's a very good question, and it may seem rather simple, but I think there are a couple of levels that it might be helpful to unpack. First, there's the intergovernmental process, which is essentially what those of us who are within the UN bubble are most familiar with. The negotiations, the agreements, the texts, the paragraphs, the chapters of an outcome document. There are three outcome documents that will come from this summit. One is the Pact for the Future, and then there are two annexes. One is a global digital compact, and the other is a declaration on future generations. My hope is that these three documents can serve as a sort of inspiration, both an institutional inspiration and a governance inspiration for those delegates to come, so they have a vision of how to shift global governance in a way that better meets the needs of present and future generations. Now, at the moment, we are in the thick of negotiations. There are many paragraphs that are being questioned. Countries come in with their national positions, and this is part of the political process. And its outcomes are largely dependent on what countries and civil society in the UN does with these documents. So there's that very technical side. I'm hopeful that we'll get some new and interesting outcomes from it related to the digital space, of course, how we conceive of our relationship with future generations, and then some modifications to the global governance system, ranging from the very technical to the very well-known, like the Security Council representation. But time will tell on that. For me, I'm actually less interested in the intergovernmental process. I'm more interested in the discourse, the social dynamics, the relationships, the vision that I think Secretary General Guterres was really trying to help us look towards as we are encountering a new reality as a human species. Our interdependence is quite clear as society, and we need spaces where we can figure out how governance can align with this reality of our interdependence. And I think I'm excited to know what is it that people are thinking, what opportunities are they creating using the Summit of the Future as a platform. So whether it's charter reform, UN charter reform, or ways of analyzing and assessing social development, scientific progress, technical development. These things are happening regardless of what the UN itself does. I mean, people around the world use these summits as hooks, as opportunities to further develop their thinking. And I'm really curious to learn, what have people been thinking? What are they bringing to New York at the end of this month? And what can I learn from and contribute to in the process?
You know, Daniel, we have difficulties even in dealing with the present young generation of youth. And when we say the next generation, what do we mean? Maybe we can explain it better to our listeners.
So for me, the next generation is less about a timeline and a group of humans, a group of people, because you could even think of generations of trees or of animals. There's all kinds of this generational regeneration that we can conceive of. But to me, it's a concept. How do we analyze and treat the world if we're conceiving of it with this long-term future perspective? So many of the debates that I see at the UN are about the here and now. And that's all important. We have crises here and now. And I think we need to be putting out those fires to the best of our ability. But maybe to continue the fire analogy, the future generations to me is about what is the new building they're going to live in that ensures that there are no fires in the first place. We need the firefighters to come in and help treat the pandemics and the wars and the climate change that we see right now. That's all to the good, and I encourage that and continue that. But at the same time, we need to be thinking about how can we build a society for future generations, whether it's in 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, so that they can live sustainably in harmony with the earth, in harmony with each other. And that's a whole different framework. That's not looking at the battles of the moment and trying to fix them. That's happening. But it's looking at resilience for the future and preparing ourselves to have a system and a structure that can allow human flourishing for generations to come. That was maybe a very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, yes, it's great. Actually, you also made me think about to be in harmony with the universe and in harmony with the space. Who knows what's going to happen from now until the next 300 years. Huh. So, Daniel, based on your experience and the principles of social fairness, what advice would you give to a business or a multinational company on aligning their strategies with global sustainability goals while staying also profitable? And as I said, we're talking about the present and the future. So what could be your advice?
This is a very difficult question, not least because I'm not in the business world. So please take it with a huge grain of salt. I do know that many of the motivating factors for private companies have to do with financial success. And I think that has to happen in order for a company to succeed. I wonder how we can move that financial success definition to be a bit more expansive. Often it's about the quarters. What is the next quarterly report, the quarterly cycle? How do I show my shareholders, or how do I show those who've invested in me that I am profitable? And I think that's super important. At some point, once that sort of momentum has started, there does need to be this added factor about long-term sustainability. And I don't mean sustainability fiscally. Hopefully that has come to fruition. But this endless aspiration for more has to be balanced against the finite carrying capacity of the planet. And no one business on its own will tip the whole balance of the planet, but we all collectively have a responsibility. And I think as the private companies wield their tremendous influence, and often it's for the betterment of humanity. I'm not one who discounts the added value of private enterprise, but there always needs to be a question about, is this going to last? If everybody behaved this way, would it redound to the benefits of humanity and the planet? That question we haven't yet learned how to integrate in our quarterly reporting cycles, in our legal obligations. And I think we need to start to. So there are companies that are thinking about how to change the legal frameworks, how to change the responsibility, the reporting mechanisms, in order to ensure that financial stability and long-term sustainable developments go hand in hand. And I don't have the answer, but I do think the question needs to be asked time and time again. And there are brilliant people who are working in the private sector who have the best interests of humanity at heart. And I want their brains to be working on this, not mine. But I think the question is super important. How do we balance the short-term financial needs and the long-term sustainability needs of humanity and of the planet? And as we can unpack that question in a way that is really looking towards the betterment of the world, I think we will find the right answers. There are many people more brilliant than I who will do so. But I think the question is where we have to begin.
Among other various activities, you are representing Baha international community at the United Nations. And I wonder, if I think about this last question and answer of yours, if the Baha international community could organize something in this regard. But in general, what makes the Baha international community stand out in the crowded arena of international organizations, Daniel?
Well, I hope that's a difficult question again, because I can say what I hope makes us stand out, but others perhaps can correct me where
Your
I'm
opinion.
wrong.
Okay.
Yes, my hope for what makes us stand out is that we are trying to work toward the well-being of all humanity beyond any particular constituency. And what do I mean by that? So at the UN, often the way civil society and others engage is on behalf of a group of people, whether it's persons with disabilities, indigenous people, youth, women, children, even nations. Every representative here is acting in the best interest of their country. And that's all super important. And I'm glad that there are many people with that degree of expertise and excellence in that area of work. What I think is the niche that the Baha'i community is trying to fill, alongside some others, we're not alone, is what are the solutions that can benefit all of humanity? So I'll give an example from an experience I had with a persons with disabilities meeting that took place in my office, where one individual rightfully said, this policy has tremendous impacts on the 1.4 billion people in the world with disabilities. And I said, I agree. But it also has an impact on the 6.4 billion others, because when persons with disabilities advance, we all advance. And as long as we're only thinking about our niche and our group, we're not thinking about the well-being of all. And she said, you're absolutely right. I'm so glad that you corrected me, because that's how we have to be thinking. And I think this small example is what we try to do time and again. In the spaces that focus on the advancement of women, we're also thinking about the role of men. In the spaces on youth, we're thinking about children and older generations. We always have to be thinking about the whole of humanity in this, because if we are all describing an elephant, but from different positions, then somebody has to be looking at the whole elephant. And I think that's our value add. Hopefully, others will agree, and we try to do our best in this regard in all spaces in which we engage.
I might be using your metaphor of the elephant. I loved it. Daniel, do you think the Summit of the Future can actually deliver on its promises? And I wonder if we're just repeating the same discussions with no real actions. What is your view from what you're seeing happening?
So every conversation happens within the context of what is possible, right? I think at the moment, there's a big gap between what we can do and what we need to do. And I think by that measuring stick, I don't think the Summit of the Future will achieve everything that humanity needs. I fear that we will have continued wars, continued catastrophes, environmental, human imposed, all of these things will continue to happen because we are not at the point of maturity that we need to be for the summit to be successful. It is a little bit like saying to the baby who's learning to walk, when they take their first step, do you think that they're finally going to learn how to walk? Well, the answer is no, because it's the first time they're trying. This isn't the first time the UN is trying. I'm not making that claim. We had the League of Nations and the UN. We have a lot of experience, but it is the same in that it takes practice. And you have to practice in the good times and you have to practice in the bad times. Right now, I would propose is a pretty bad time for global governance and the global order, but we still have to practice having this conversation. Now, we might not do as well as the last time we practiced, which I would say was 2015 when we managed to articulate these amazing sustainable development goals. But we have to keep trying. So on the one hand, I would say I agree in a sense with your premise that it may not achieve what we need it to. But on the other hand, it's still a necessity. We still have to try. And so we live in this duality. And I think that's, with enough practice, eventually one of these summits will do the trick. This one, probably not, but it gets us on the road to getting there.
Yes, as the Secretary General used to say, and probably he still does, these summits are a turbo for the Sustainable Development Goals and beyond at this point, because 2030 is just around the corner, right?
Yes.
So, as you said, these are seeds that needed to be nourished in order to keep growing and become strong, powerful oats and bring the well-being to the people, to the planet, and allow me to say to the universe as well.
Sure.
So, in your view, Daniel, is the Baha international community's influence at the UN enough? You just gave some sort of answer, but I would like to dig it a teeny bit deeper. Is it enough to challenge the status quo? Or are they just, sorry to say, but I have to play a little bit the devil here, just another voice in the choir?
So everybody starts as another voice in the choir. And I think that's okay. We need to be in that choir collectively, and there's no soloists, essentially. But eventually you do find what are those voices that seem to be resonating best with the audience, with the times, with the necessities. And as the Baha'i community at the grassroots level is gaining experience on what is helping ensure social progress, we are able to bring those narratives into the UN space and demonstrate that actually social cohesion is a vital part of progress. And yet it's sort of neglected at the international level. How can we then bring that more into the spaces in which we engage? And I'm just mentioning one small example to say that there are many voices. No one voice will ever be enough. We all have to be, in this game together. But as we're learning and as we're growing, I think that we will have perhaps more influence, and there will be others who are attracted to what we're trying to share. And I've seen that in the short time that I've been at the office. It used to be that we were desperate to try to get an ambassador into our meeting room for a conversation. And now we have ambassadors requesting us, to be a part of their events. And I think that this isn't self-congratulatory. It's really that what we are learning and what we're contributing, we think is ever more applicable and necessary for the time in which we live. And hopefully we can be one voice among many others that is learning and growing and continuing to contribute in ways that are helpful to the community.
Yes, this is a great example also of resilience. Thank you for sharing that. So we spoke about impacts. So allow me to go to the past. Let's talk about the past, because we
Sure.
measure impacts by looking at what we did in the past. So once upon a time, by looking back at the past and reflecting on your early experiences in international human rights and development, Daniel, How have those roles shaped your perspective on fairness in global businesses or policy or governance practices?
So maybe I'll go even a little bit further into the past, into my own upbringing. I was born and raised in an upper middle class American small town, very typical American narrative. And then I traveled, I had the opportunity to travel and live in the Marshall Islands for 3 months when I was at university. And when I was there, I realized that I had been living with blinders on. And I just did not know what humanity was really experiencing. And so I decided that it would be best for me to try to experience more of the world, to see more of the stories that are actually unfolding in the lives of billions. The United States is big, but it is not representative of the entire world, obviously. And so I traveled to different parts of the world, trying to help out as best I could, hopefully humbly, and learning from these communities. And I think in this process, I realized that while there are many different experiences and types of experiences, they're all human in a sense. And it sounds like a kind of an obvious thing to say, but with any family, there's love, or at least the aspiration for love. There's humor, there's joy, there's sadness. And I think that this shared experience that we all have um, is something that we would do well to tap into. One of the things I've learned in the human rights space and in the intergovernmental space is that often we focus so much on what divides us. You are X and I am Y. You are A and I am B. And we distinguish ourselves based on these identities and these histories. And that's all true. We have many different cells in our body, but ultimately we are one body. And I think that this reality of the international order, where we focus so much on what divides us, actually undermines what I think is at the heart of our aspirations, which are things that should unite us. And in my 15 years here, from the beginning to where I am now, I realized that this focus on the separateness of humans is somewhat unhealthy. Now, it's not to say that we're all the same and we have to focus on our samenesses. Everything's in balance. But if we ignore those, aspirations of love and of well-being and of joy and of humor and of beauty, if we ignore those things in favor only of you're wrong and I'm right, my way is the best way, if that's how we're going to try to advance, then we're not going to make it very far. But I think that there's a growing movement of people who are seeing this reality, and I think that's a tremendous shift brought on by shared challenges, brought on by many shared tragedies, unfortunately. But we can try to tap into that, what we call solidarity. But I don't think it's just solidarity in theory. It has to be solidarity in practice. And that to me is sort of how my own history of, upper middle classness has evolved to where I hope that I can learn from others and contribute my own 2 cents, but hopefully humbly and with the appropriate posture, so that we can learn best from each other.
I really do hope that the summit of the future will bring back all nations and people to the reasons why the United Nations were created 70 years ago, to bring peace on earth, human rights, and social justice. So I'm with you on that. Now, about the present, currently, how do you navigate the challenges of advocating for global citizenship and also social sustainability within the complex ecosystem of the UN and also global businesses, Daniel?
Sure, it's actually not as hard as it would seem. I do think that the individuals, whether it's ambassadors, whether it's business leaders, whether it's NGOs, the individuals recognize that we are one shared family on one shared planet. And this seems somewhat obvious, but I think that it is a tremendous shift in the narrative history of humanity. The next leap we have to take is how to bring that understanding from the individual mind to the institutional setting. So how do we move past this idea of national interest first or constituency interest first to recognizing that actually if it's humanity first, then all of us can advance. And it's difficult to do so in policy, in part because the inertia of the status quo is so strong that people will individually say, yes, Dan, I really agree with you when you talk about the oneness of humanity. But I don't know how to put that into practice. I don't know how to write that into legislation, and I'm serving my government or I'm serving my CEO or what have you. But I think that we just need to find that courage, that creativity, and that's actually where the gap is. It's a leap of imagination that we have to take to get from where we are to where we know we need to be. Everybody knows it. And it's one of those cognitive dissonance moments where you say, but you just told me privately that you think that all the world is one. And now you're here and you're arguing this policy. How do you deal with that? And people live with cognitive dissonance. I think ultimately this is the job we have, is to help find ways for the understanding of our shared humanity to find expression in the policies and practices of business, of politics, and of NGOs around the world.
Daniel, you just said where we need to be. So let's move to the future, where we need to be. So if you were 20 years old in 2071, looking ahead in the future, you can share your vision. What would you hope to see unfold for the generations to come? And we said generations are not only human beings, can be trees, animals, the air, water, whatever.
So looking, 50 years in advance is always a tall task because it's a little bit of guesswork, but it's actually something that I think is really important. There was an individual who said at a meeting, I like to think 100 years into the future where we have stopped climate change, there's no more war, men and women are equal. And I like to think, what were the policies that we put into place today that allowed us to get to that point? And I think that vision is where we have to start. So I really appreciate this question. Now, if I were 20 years old in 2071, what hope would I have for the world? It would be that we all have access to education, to the material necessities of life, that isn't a question anymore. We already live in a world of sufficiency, as in there's enough food, there's enough water, there's enough air for everyone to live in harmony. However,
if properly distributed.
Yes. However, we have a distribution problem. And the distribution problem is not only a technical problem. I actually think it's not at all a technical problem. It's a problem of how we define success and progress, which is largely by measures of accumulation. So I think that the first thing that would have to change between now and 2071 is our definition of success. It has to be one of sufficiency, not of excess. Right now, we think more and more and more equates with progress. But that, of course, can't work on a finite planet. So that shift, that very humble shift in our own personal narratives, I think would have a tremendous impact on the way nations behave with each other, the way human beings behave with each other. So I think that would be one fundamental shift. Another one would be our conception of identity, which is to say that we have to recognize that we are all human beings first, and that our own cultural, religious, national identities are secondary. They're all important, but they are secondary to our humanity. So, a question on the treatment of others. The first question should be, are you a human? Yes, then you have everything entitled and described in the Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, that's the starting point. So I think identity is another thing we'll have to move past. And then the third is simply that opportunity is there. And it sounds quite simple, but for many, it's not that they don't have the capacity. It's not that they don't have the skills or even the desire. It's that there is not the opportunity. And this is really the great injustice that we see in the world. We are losing so much in the way of human progress by not providing equal opportunities to all 8 billion people to bring their imagination, their skills, their creativity to benefit all of us. And I think with those three shifts, one of opportunity, one of identity, and one of our measures of progress, I think the world will be a much different place. Now, these are only the principles. What it will look like in practice, we can all, draw our or paint our picture. But for me, I think that these three principal shifts hopefully will be the big difference between humans in 50 years and the humans of today.
And indeed, we are not talking about politics. We're talking about policies, which is something else when it comes to distribution, equity, and equal opportunities. And it comes back to me something I was studying at the university, law, the res publica, that is the management of the goods belonging to the community, the public. Well, we're almost at the end of our conversation, Daniel. So I would like to ask you at this time to ask yourself a question, and what would be the answer you give to yourself to that question?
I love this question. You wrote it in an email to me.
Yes.
So I was somewhat prepared, but I knew that I was never prepared for the answer because I think that the answer changes day to day. But the question that I would ask myself is, am I doing enough? Mm-hmm. Every day when I go to work, when I come home from work, when I put the kids to bed, I'm thinking, am I doing enough? And I actually don't know. I have so many privileges. I have so many opportunities, to reference the earlier part of the conversation. I never know if I'm quite doing enough. But I think that question is so important for us to always be asking ourselves. Am I being courageous enough? Am I taking the risks that I need to take? Am I being selfless enough? Am I thinking about others first? Ultimately, am I doing enough to contribute to that world of 2071 that I just described as this wonderful place? Well, how am I helping us to get there? And the true answer is I don't know, but I keep striving. And I think that that's what allows me to stay in this space after 15 years of, as you referenced earlier, what may be the same conversations over and over again. Because we have to keep practicing. We have to keep trying. And I don't know if it's ever enough, but I'll be judged at the end, I suppose, like all of us will. And that's when I'll get my answer. But I think the question is important that I keep asking myself, and hopefully others keep asking themselves too.
So let me ask you the last question. You triggered the last question now. Do you think you're doing the best you can instead of doing enough?
Some days.
Okay.
If I'm honest, some days better than others. But there are many different light bulbs that we have to keep on, right? Some of them are family light bulbs. Some of them are personal light bulbs. Some of them are service to humanity light bulbs. And hopefully they all illumine the same world. So I never know if I try to be doing the best I can, but we'll see.
Daniel, if someone would like to get in touch with you or with the Baha'i international community and so on, how can they do that?
There are a few ways, but you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Daniel Perell there, or at Perell on X or Twitter. I'm not that hard to find. I think there's 2 or 3 Daniel Perells in the world, and Google is pretty good. So
Perell is Perell.
That's the one.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Daniel, and have a wonderful day. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Ciao.
As I wrap up this episode, my heartfelt gratitude to today's guest and to all of you. Join me for the next episode as we delve deeper with special guests, uncovering thought-provoking insights and actionable steps, paving the way for a brighter, inclusive, sustainable tomorrow. Thanks also to Damian Morton, music, and Maria Cortez Gagliano, social media. Don't miss out next episode on shaping the future we aspire to. Ciao, ciao!